The glass walls of the executive conference room glinted with the soft gray light of a Seattle morning as I stepped inside. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, but the air in the room was unnervingly still. Two people were already seated at the table. Marjorie Lang, my direct supervisor, and Denise from Human Resources, both with identical expressions of carefully rehearsed corporate regret. I knew exactly what this was. "Elaine," Marjorie began, folding her hands neatly in front of her, "after 22 years with Noviaxis, we've made the difficult decision to restructure your position." She said it like she was sorry, but she wasn't. I could hear it in the tremble that wasn't quite sorrow. It was satisfaction, barely masked behind her polished tone. "We're moving in a more agile, forward-thinking direction," Denise added, sliding a manila folder toward me as if it contained anything more than a 2-week severance per year and a reminder that my time here no longer held value. "Your contributions have been appreciated, but the company is changing." I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I looked at them both and offered a measured nod. "I understand." A flicker of confusion passed over Marjorie's eyes. Denise shifted slightly in her seat, as if bracing for protest. They were expecting shock, tears, indignation. Instead, I sat there composed, calm, because the truth was, I had known this moment was coming. 3 weeks ago, a misrouted internal email had landed in my inbox, a thread between Marjorie and the executive team titled Q for Leadership Realignment. I wasn't meant to see it, of course, but I did. And in that moment, I saw everything clearly. My time at Noviaxis wasn't being evaluated, it was being erased. Marjorie cleared her throat. "We'd like you to return your laptop, keycard, and company phone by Friday. Your team will be notified this afternoon. We've prepared a transition plan." My team, 6 brilliant minds I had personally recruited, trained, and led for years. Together, we'd built the data engine that powered ClearGrid, the company's flagship financial analytics tool used by over 200 banks across the country. The very heart of Noviaxis' success. And now they were cutting out the person who'd created it. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice steady. The question seemed to unnerve them more than anything. Marjorie blinked. "No, that's all. Thank you for being professional." Professional. I nearly laughed. I stood, gathered the untouched folder, and offered a small, courteous smile. "Then I'll begin clearing my office." As I walked through the halls of the 34th floor, my heels echoing across polished marble, I caught glimpses of my colleagues behind glass walls. Some looked up with curiosity, others with pity. But no one said a word. Noviaxis was a place where silence was safer than solidarity. Passing by the main conference room, I caught a glimpse of Victor Reynolds, the CEO, gesturing animatedly at a screen, no doubt discussing quarterly projections. The same man who, just last year, stood on stage at a tech summit and presented ClearGrid as our team's proudest achievement, conveniently omitting my name. I reached my office, shut the door behind me, and finally exhaled. Then, from my personal phone, I sent a single message. "It's done. Friday's the last day." The reply came almost instantly. "Perfect. Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize details." I looked at the framed photo on my desk, me and my team at last year's holiday party, everyone smiling, unaware of the storm that was coming. My hand lingered for a second on the coffee mug they'd gifted me, the brain behind the grid. That was what they used to call me. And now the company thought they could remove me like a worn-out cog in a shiny machine. They had no idea that by Friday I wouldn't just walk out quietly. I'd take their future with me, because what they didn't know was that I'd already built something better. It started with a ping, just a soft notification at the bottom corner of my screen. Q for Leadership Realignment. At first, I thought it was another department-wide memo, but as I clicked and scrolled, the blood drained from my face. This wasn't meant for me. The thread spanned 12 replies. Names I knew too well: Victor, Marjorie, Denise, and the entire executive team. And me, not included in the conversation, but very much the subject of it. She's a legacy player, but not scalable. Her leadership style is dated. We need to position younger, more dynamic talent as the future. I read those words 3 times before closing my laptop, unable to breathe. After 22 years, they had reduced me to an obstacle, not a pillar, not a founder of the very system their success depended on, but a relic. I sat in my office in stunned silence for an hour that day, staring at the walls I'd once painted in my favorite shade of cobalt, surrounded by awards that now felt meaningless. That was the moment something inside me broke and then clicked into place. I opened a private notebook I'd kept since the early days of ClearGrid. Sketches of improved architecture, notes on increasing processing efficiency, API models they had never seen. All of it mine, and none of it created on company time. I hadn't touched the notebook in years. But that night, for the first time in a long time, I felt awake. Alive. For the next 4 weeks, I worked in silence. I started rebuilding the engine, my engine, on an isolated laptop in my home study. I rewrote core algorithms, implemented newer, lighter data compression frameworks, and cut the average processing latency in half. Night after night, I coded in the soft hum of a quiet house, while Seattle rain pattered against the window panes. Every log, every version, every timestamp meticulously backed up and documented. This wasn't just side work. This was my exit strategy. 2 weeks into the project, I realized something else. When Novaxis launched ClearGrid 6 years ago, they'd promised to file the patent on my behalf. But it never showed up in the USPTO database. I searched again. Still nothing. The company had never filed it. I confronted Marjorie in passing a few days later, feigning curiosity. By the way, do we have the ClearGrid patent certificate somewhere on file? She blinked, momentarily thrown off. Oh, the legal team handled that, I think, ages ago. I'll check. Her voice was breezy, dismissive, and very, very wrong. That night, I sent an encrypted email to Gregory Sullivan. Greg had once been my peer at a different firm, one of the few who'd treated me like an equal in the early years. Now he was the CEO of Helix Core Systems, Novaxis's fiercest competitor. He picked up after the first ring. "Elaine Harper," he said, his tone warm but alert. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you again." I told him everything. The email, the betrayal, the algorithm I'd just rebuilt, and the patent I intended to file, this time under my own name. Greg didn't hesitate. "My legal team will handle it. Quietly. We'll make sure it's airtight." The next morning, I submitted the provisional patent. Personal device, personal email, personal documentation. Everything time-stamped, clean, and untraceable to Novaxis. Within 3 days, Greg had connected me with one of the most formidable IP attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. 2 weeks later, the full patent was filed and pending review, with priority evidence to support it. And that's when we started the real conversation. "If this goes through," Greg said, "I want exclusive licensing. And I want you." "To do what?" "To lead our innovation division. You'll have full control, full credit, and a full seat at the table." I paused, not out of doubt, but out of awe. After 22 years of being talked over, overlooked, and dismissed, someone was offering me not just a position, but recognition. "I'm in," I said. We agreed to keep it quiet until the patent cleared. But we both knew the timing would be perfect. Once Novaxis pushed me out, they'd assume they'd won, that I'd fade into irrelevance. But by the time they realized what I had done, it would already be too late. I wasn't just building an algorithm anymore. I was building my freedom. The restaurant was dimly lit, hushed, and elegant, the kind of place where conversations stayed private and the staff knew better than to linger. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always. Greg was already seated, tucked into a velvet-lined alcove behind a screen of etched glass and cherry wood. Elaine, he said, rising from his seat with a warm, knowing smile. You look like someone who's about to reclaim everything that's been taken from her. I returned the smile and slid into the seat across from him. The soft clink of polished silverware, the distant hum of jazz. It all felt almost surreal after the past few weeks. But I was exactly where I needed to be. They finally did it, I said, setting my phone down beside the untouched water glass. Friday's my last day. Greg shook his head slowly. I suspected they would. But cutting the architect of their flagship product? That's bold. I tilted my head. It's not bold. It's stupid. Victor never understood what ClearGrid really was. He saw the interface, the dashboards, the slick marketing, but the engine, the structure, the actual innovation, that was just technical stuff to him. Replaceable. Greg raised an eyebrow. Is it? Not anymore, I said, leaning back as our server approached. We ordered salmon for him, risotto for me, but neither of us were really thinking about the food. When the server disappeared again, Greg slid a sleek black folder across the table. Inside, a final licensing agreement, legal confirmations, and a job offer. Everything's ready, he said. 7-figure signing bonus, performance-based equity, and full royalties from any products that use the new algorithm. You'll lead the innovation division. Report directly to me. Total creative freedom. I reviewed the documents, slowly, methodically. Not because I hadn't read them before. I had, line by line, more than once, but because the moment demanded ceremony, precision, finality. You understand what this means, I said at last. Come Monday, Novi Access will realize they just gave away their future. They won't just realize it, Greg replied. They'll feel it. I signed the last page with a steady hand and closed the folder. There was no rush of adrenaline, no gleeful spark, just clarity. For 22 years, I had built their systems, solved their problems, mentored their talent, and watched them climb on my shoulders while calling me supporting staff. They took credit, they took power, they took space. But tonight, I took it back. To new beginnings, Greg said, raising his glass. And to owning your own value, I answered, clinking his glass gently. We talked for another hour, plans, transition strategies, discreet outreach to key team members I hoped to bring with me. Greg had already drafted offers for 6 of my engineers, each one with a generous salary bump and a seat on the next big thing. He understood loyalty not just as a business strategy, but as a principle. As we left the restaurant, rain fell in a slow mist, wrapping the city in silver. My heels clicked against the sidewalk as I walked toward the car waiting at the curb. Inside the folder in my hand was not just a contract, it was proof. Proof that I had never been disposable, that innovation didn't have an expiration date, that no matter how many polished conference rooms they built at Novi Access, they had failed to secure the one thing that mattered most, me. And come Monday morning, when the press release hit, when the headlines splashed across tech news feeds, and when Victor Reynolds opened his inbox and felt his stomach drop, they would understand. They hadn't just let me go. They'd given me the opening I needed to burn everything down and rebuild it under my own name. Friday dawned gray and misty, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I arrived at Novi Access earlier than usual, walking through the glass atrium with the same steady stride I'd perfected over 2 decades. No one looked twice. Not yet. My office, corner unit, southwest view, was exactly as I'd left it. A neat row of conference badges from industry events lined the shelf. My mug, the brain behind the grid, still sat beside the keyboard. On the wall, an award plaque commemorating the launch of ClearGrid's first version gleamed faintly in the morning light. A monument to forgotten credit. I sat down and began the methodical process of extracting myself. Emails, file transfers, password logs, process documentation. Over the course of 7 hours, I compiled every scrap of institutional knowledge I held. every system, shortcut, and solution. I documented it all with surgical precision. Some would call that generous. But it wasn't kindness. It was leverage, a record that I had departed in full compliance, having given them everything they thought they wanted, while keeping what they actually needed. As I packed my personal items, I was interrupted by quiet knocks. First from administrative assistants, some offering shy goodbyes, others just sympathetic nods. Then a few junior developers, asking if I might connect on LinkedIn. I nodded, smiled, said of course. Even signed a few farewell cards. They didn't know yet, but they would. At 3 p.m., I reported to HR for my exit interview. Denise was waiting with a clipboard and a practice smile. Her tone was robotic, her questions lifted from a standard template. You understand that any intellectual property developed during your employment remains the property of Novaxis, she said, sliding a non-disclosure agreement toward me. I smiled back just as politely. Of course, anything created within the scope of my role, during company hours, using company resources. I emphasized each qualifier like a metronome. She nodded, scribbling notes. She didn't catch the nuance, but I knew someone would. And you affirm you have no copies of proprietary company information? I have taken nothing that belongs to Novaxis, I answered truthfully. The algorithm I now owned, the one that outperformed the original by 43%, was not theirs. It never had been. By late afternoon, my desk was bare. The framed photo of my team from last year's conference. The small crystal paperweight I'd been gifted by a client in year 10. The hand-signed thank you card from our first CTO long gone. I wrapped each in tissue, placed them carefully in the cardboard box HR had provided. The irony wasn't lost on me. How much care I still took for things they'd long since stopped valuing. Marjorie appeared at my door, just as I was taping the box shut. Elaine, she said, leaning on the frame like we were old friends catching up. I just wanted to make sure everything's in order for your departure. Crystal clear, I said, smoothing the tape with the side of my hand. Her gaze dropped to the award on top of the box. The one for a clear grid, the one with my name, smaller than the company's. You know, she said, voice light, these decisions are never personal. Victor feels the company needs to move in a more youthful direction. I looked up and met her eyes. I understand completely. Business is business. For a moment, something flickered behind her polished veneer, a shadow of uncertainty, but she pushed it aside quickly. After all, what could a soon-to-be unemployed 56-year-old woman possibly do? Will you be taking some time off? She asked, her tone suddenly performative, curious, almost condescending. Actually, I replied, slipping on my coat, I already have something lined up. That made her blink. Oh, that's fast. Anything interesting? A leadership position, I said, smiling as I lifted the box. I'm quite excited about it. She nodded, faltering slightly. Well, good luck with that. I nodded back. Thank you. And just like that, I walked out of Novaxis Technologies for the last time. I returned my badge at the security desk, handed off my laptop, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, I looked up one last time at the gleaming logo above the lobby. 22 years distilled into a quiet exit and a storm they never saw coming. That night, I placed the Novaxis Award in the bottom drawer of a cabinet I rarely opened. Not out of bitterness, but because it no longer defined me. The industry would know my name soon enough. Monday morning arrived clear and sharp, the kind of Seattle day that felt like a reward. I stood by the window of my new office on the 42nd floor of Helix Score's headquarters, watching as sunlight lit up the water below. The space was sleek, minimal, powerful, floor-to-ceiling glass, a mahogany desk, and a leather chair that didn't creak when I moved. I hadn't even sat down yet when my phone buzzed. Greg's voice came through before I could say hello. It's live. At exactly 7 a.m., the press release dropped. Helix Core Systems acquires exclusive rights to revolutionary processing algorithm, appoints creator Elaine Harper as Chief Innovation Officer. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Industry newsletters, LinkedIn feeds, tech blogs. It didn't just name me as the inventor of the algorithm. It laid out in meticulous detail how Helix Core had secured the patent, how any company currently using the technology would now need to license it through us. I took a sip of coffee, real coffee, not the burnt machine sludge from Novaxis's break room, and opened the blinds fully. This was my view now. At 9:15 a.m., my phone lit up again. Miguel, my lead developer, loyal, brilliant, and very much still inside Novaxis, at least for now. Text, complete chaos here. What did you do? I smiled as I typed back. Check your personal email. All 6 of you have offers waiting. 10 seconds later, we're in. When can we start? Meanwhile, 8 miles away, the 9:30 executive meeting at Novaxis had turned into a full-blown emergency. Miguel fed me a blow-by-blow in real time. Victor showed up late. Legal and finance were waiting outside his office with the announcement already printed out. Everyone's panicking. They've pulled the dev servers. Your name's all over everything. I could see it all in my mind. Victor pacing the boardroom, slamming his fist on the table, demanding answers no one could give him. Marjorie trying to explain how they'd missed filing the patent, how they'd restructured the person who held the keys to their core product. By 10:45, Victor broke protocol and sent me an email directly. The desperation practically dripped off the screen. Subject: urgent clarification needed, Elaine. There appears to be a misunderstanding. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss. I'm confident we can resolve this amicably. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Helix Core's legal team with the subject line, predictable. By noon, the industry was buzzing. Tech news outlets were calling it the algorithm coup. One journalist tweeted, Novaxis just handed their golden goose to the competition. Worst strategic blunder in a decade. Their stock dropped 7% by midday. Ours climbed 12%. Greg dropped by my office after lunch. You look calm. I am, I said, sliding a signed memo across my desk. This is the team structure for innovation. Miguel and the others start Monday. He nodded. They'll be thrilled. Also, Victor's tried calling 4 times. You're a very popular woman today. If he wants to talk, I said, standing and smoothing my blazer, he can go through our attorneys. As I headed toward my first all-hands meeting with Helix Core's development team, another message from Miguel buzzed in. Board just called emergency session. Victor looks like he's about to explode. P.S. We all accepted. Ready to start next week. By Tuesday, the full weight of what had happened settled across the industry. Novaxis's flagship product, ClearGrid, couldn't legally operate without my algorithm. They now faced 2 options: license the technology from Helix Core, or rebuild their core system from scratch. And building it again, without my architecture, that would take years. Victor tried to save face. He held an all-hands Zoom that afternoon, assuring staff they would vigorously defend their IP rights. But the anxiety was palpable. Several employees updated their LinkedIn profiles before the call even ended. Miguel sent me a screenshot of the moment someone asked Marjorie if the company had ever actually filed the patent. Her face said it all. They cut the wrong person, Greg said in our end-of-day debrief. And now they'll pay for it. I didn't gloat, not out loud. But that night, I sat by my window with a glass of wine, watching the lights of the city flicker below. The headlines kept rolling in. The damage was spreading. Novaxis had made a fatal mistake. They'd underestimated me. They thought I'd fade, collapse, retire quietly. Instead, I reinvented everything. By Wednesday, the headlines had evolved from shocked to savage. The collapse of a titan. How Novaxis lost its soul, the woman they underestimated now owns their future. One signature, one algorithm. One mistake, I didn't have to search for them. my assistant forwarded them automatically. And while the world speculated, Noviaxis bled. Their stock had plummeted 23% since Monday morning, triggering investor alarms and boardroom reckonings. Financial analysts scrambled to calculate the cost of licensing my patent. Some estimated 8 figures annually. Others speculated that Greg wouldn't license it at all, that Helix Core planned to dominate the market while Noviaxis floundered. And all the while I remained silent. Victor sent 2 more emails. The tone shifted from authoritative to pleading. By Thursday, he looped in his legal counsel. Finally, they reached out to Helix Core's attorneys to initiate dialogue about possible licensing arrangements. We were prepared. Helix Core's legal team responded firmly, but not cruelly. The terms were clear: market rates, no exceptions, and strict licensing timelines. We weren't here for revenge. We were here for ownership and value. Meanwhile, my former team at Noviaxis was packing up their offices. Miguel texted, "They've put Marjorie on extended leave." Legal scrambling. Half the exec team is in full meltdown. Victor's locked in a conference room with outside consultants. Rumor is they're building a case to sue you. I forwarded the message to our counsel. "Let them try," came the reply. "You have timestamps, contracts, off-site logs, hardware receipts, Git history. It's airtight." I knew that, but still, the vindication ran deeper than legality. Because for years, I had watched people speak over me in meetings, take credit for my ideas, push me to the margins with phrases like fresh energy and modern vision. I was told to be grateful, to play nice, to mentor younger talent, then step aside. But now, when I spoke, entire teams listened. That afternoon, Greg knocked on my door with a quiet smile. "Early results are in. Your new architecture's already improving our platform efficiency by 51%. I blinked. 51. He nodded. "Even better than you predicted." I turned to look out the window, not because I was surprised, but because I didn't want him to see the emotion that surged behind my eyes. It wasn't pride. Not exactly. It was recognition. Real, long overdue recognition. Meanwhile, inside Noviaxis, Victor was holding yet another town hall. According to Miguel's final report, someone had asked, plainly, if the board was aware the patent had never been filed. Marjorie wasn't there to deflect. Legal tried, but the truth was too stark to spin. By Friday, Helix Core's inbox was flooded with resumes, not from interns or junior devs, but from senior staff, data architects, systems leads. People who once wouldn't return my emails were now calling me Dr. Harper and asking for 15 minutes of my time. The irony was exquisite. I didn't respond to all of them, but I read every message, every subject line that said, "I remember when," or "I should have listened when." Those who stayed silent when I was pushed out were now seeking shelter from the fire they helped spark. 1 year ago, I was asked to clean out my desk. Now, I was sitting in a corner office, reviewing product roadmaps and quarterly innovations built on the very system they dismissed. The difference? My name was on everything. Miguel and the rest of the team had already integrated seamlessly into Helix Core. During our Monday huddle, Anita, one of my former engineers, turned to me with a quiet smile. "This is what a dev meeting should feel like," she said. "At Noviaxis, we spend half the time explaining basic logic to executives who didn't understand the tech and didn't want to." I nodded. I understood exactly what she meant. I wasn't just part of the new system. I was the system. And Noviaxis? They were now a cautionary tale in boardrooms across the country. The ballroom of the National Technology Innovation Conference pulsed with quiet anticipation. Rows of executives, developers, journalists, and students filled the hall, faces lit by the soft glow of the massive stage lights. Somewhere in the crowd, I spotted a familiar silhouette, Miguel, seated beside Anita, both of them smiling up at me like proud co-conspirators. "And now," the announcer said, voice echoing across the room, "please welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Elaine Harper, Chief Innovation Officer of Helix Core Systems. Applause erupted, but I barely heard it. I stepped out into the light, and for the first time in 22 years, my name was the one being spoken. Not buried in a team slide, not footnoted in a white paper, not whispered behind closed doors. Spoken, celebrated. I stood tall behind the podium, letting the silence settle as the room grew still. The spotlight warmed my shoulders. My voice, when it came, was calm, steady, unapologetically clear. I want to talk to you about ownership, I began. Not just legal ownership, but something deeper, the right to be seen, heard, credited. I spoke of the algorithm, yes, but only briefly. The room wasn't here for code. They were here for a story. I gave them one. I talked about building things in the shadows, about being told to train your replacement, about the polite cruelty of being labeled outdated because your hair had grayed, because you no longer stayed late for drinks with the 20-somethings, because you wore flats instead of heels. I talked about watching others present your work as theirs, and staying quiet because speaking up would make you difficult. I didn't mention Noviaxis by name. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew. When I finished, the silence stretched again, longer this time. Then, wave by wave, the applause began. It didn't explode. It built. Quiet clapping turned into rising thunder. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. And I just stood there, letting it wash over me. Because this moment wasn't about ego. It was about arrival. That evening, at the rooftop reception, I was approached by 3 young women in their 20s, engineering students from UCLA, bright-eyed and buzzing. We just wanted to say thank you. One of them said, clutching a notebook, "You made us feel like there's room for us. Not just now, but later, after." I smiled and took their hands. "There's always room," I told them. "You just have to hold the door open long enough." Weeks passed, then months. Helix Core released 3 new products built entirely on my architecture. Each one outperformed its Noviaxis counterpart. Our market share surged. Investor calls turned into interviews. I became, as one article put it, the woman who rewrote the rules of legacy. Inside Noviaxis, the unraveling continued. Marjorie officially resigned. Victor stepped down as CEO. Richard Donovan was brought in as interim leadership, a man with a reputation for integrity, tasked with salvaging what was left. One day, a quiet email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple. Respectfully. It was from Richard. "Dr. Harper, congratulations on your new role and all you've accomplished. Noviaxis is undergoing significant restructuring, not just in leadership, but in how we recognize contribution and innovation. Your story has forced a conversation we should have had long ago. Thank you for forcing us to listen." I didn't reply, not out of malice, but because the conversation was no longer mine to lead. I had said what I needed to say by walking away. On the anniversary of my departure, Greg knocked on my office door. He held 2 champagne flutes and a bottle wrapped in silver ribbon. "Happy 1 year," he said. I laughed. "Feels like 10. He poured. "You've changed the company." I looked down at the quarterly innovation report on my desk, metrics climbing, morale rising, team thriving. "No," I said softly, raising my glass. "I just made sure no one else could change me." We toasted to survival, to strategy, to finally being seen. And as the sun sank behind the city skyline, casting golden lines across my office floor, I knew this wasn't a comeback. It was a correction.
The world keeps turning, and with each turn comes a new story. When one door closes, another opens, leading us into a journey entirely different. Let us set aside the echoes of the tale just past and step together into a new realm where another destiny awaits to be told. And now I invite you to listen to the second story, a path of its own, unrelated to what came before, yet filled with mysteries and surprises meant only for those willing to journey onward with me.
I still remember the way Ryan laughed in my face that night. It wasn't just a laugh. It was sharp, cruel, and meant to cut. If it weren't for me, you'd still be living in that rundown apartment, broke and useless. You should be kissing my feet for saving you, Hannah. So shut up and be grateful." His words didn't stop there. He made sure I knew about Melissa too, the woman he had been seeing behind my back for months, maybe even years. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. For a moment, I thought I would cry. I thought I would scream, throw something, or collapse the way I used to when his words became too heavy to bear. But this time, I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just stood there, feeling strangely empty, as if something inside me had quietly shut down. And then it hit me. Maybe I was done caring. Maybe the woman who once worshipped every word he said had already died a long time ago. The next morning, I woke up with the sun pouring through the curtains, the faint sound of gulls calling outside our home in Tampa. Ryan was already gone, probably out showing off to his friends about the perfect life he had, me included at least in his mind. I looked around at the spotless, curated home he controlled like a showroom and realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. This wasn't a home. This was a golden cage, and I had been living in it for 6 long years. I used to dream of becoming a makeup artist. I loved working with colors, textures, the art of helping people see themselves in a new light. But Ryan shut that dream down on day 1 of our marriage. "No wife of mine is going to waste time painting strangers' faces," he said, tearing up the enrollment form for a class I'd saved for months to afford. He claimed he was protecting me from low-class work, but really he wanted control. And I let him have it, thinking it was love. 6 years of schedules, 6 years of following his rules about what to wear, what to cook, who to talk to. 6 years of keeping my voice low and my head down to avoid the anger that flared whenever I dared to question him. Friends stopped calling after the awkward dinners where Ryan openly criticized me in front of them. My world grew smaller and smaller until it was just him and me, hiding pieces of who I used to be. But something changed that night when he laughed. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, like I was nothing more than another piece of furniture he owned. Or maybe it was the way he smirked when he said Melissa's name, like daring me to react. Whatever it was, something inside me quietly shifted. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I simply let the silence stretch between us like a wall I would never climb again. And I had no idea then that by the next morning, everything would start to unravel for both of us. My name is Hannah Mitchell, and for a long time, I thought my life was good enough. I had a husband with a successful business, a house near the bay in Tampa, a car I didn't have to pay for, and vacations Ryan liked to brag about at every dinner party. People would look at us and think we were perfect, but no one ever saw what was behind closed doors. Ryan had a way of making everything sound like it was for my own good. When we first married, I told him I wanted to keep working as a makeup artist to build something of my own. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Sweetheart, you don't need to work. I'll take care of everything. Focus on our home, on me." It sounded loving at the time until I realized what it really meant. My dreams didn't matter. He made the rules and I followed them, thinking that was what marriage was supposed to be. What I wore, what I cooked, how I spoke when we were around as friends. It all had to fit his vision of the perfect wife. If I bought something he didn't approve of, he'd take it back to the store without even asking. If I cooked something twice in a week, he'd push the plate away and say, "Do I look like someone who eats on repeat? Be creative, Hannah. Don't embarrass me." At first, I tried. I read cookbooks late at night, learned new recipes, styled my hair the way he liked, even avoided wearing clothes that reminded him of my small-town roots. But every effort I made just opened the door for a new complaint. I could see it in his eyes. Nothing I did was ever enough. My friends stopped coming around after a while. Ryan had a way of turning every social gathering into a performance where he played the charming husband and I played the silent, smiling wife. If I spoke too much, he'd give me that look and I'd shrink back in my chair. After one particularly awkward night where he openly corrected me 3 times in front of everyone, one of my closest friends pulled me aside and whispered, "Hannah, are you okay?" I smiled and lied, "Of course I'm fine." But I wasn't. 6 years of that chipped away at me. I woke up every morning already tired, like I was bracing for something to go wrong. Sometimes it was small, like him sighing at how I folded his shirts. Sometimes it was big, like him throwing away the old makeup kit I kept for memories, saying, "You're not going back to that nonsense." Every time, I told myself it was easier to stay quiet to keep the peace. But the truth was, I wasn't keeping peace. I was just disappearing, piece by piece, year after year. And the night he laughed in my face, the night he flaunted Melissa like a trophy, I realized just how far I'd fallen. I wasn't the woman I used to be, the one who loved color, creativity, and laughter. I had become a ghost in my own life, and for the first time in years, I was angry about it. I didn't know what to do with that anger yet, but I knew it was the start of something. Something I wasn't ready to name, but would soon change everything. The day before our trip was supposed to be exciting. Ryan had booked a week at one of the most expensive resorts in the Florida Keys, a place so exclusive you needed connections just to get on the waiting list. He strutted around the house all morning, phone in one hand, barking orders to employees while I tried to finish packing. I had spent the morning roasting a herb-seasoned chicken, one of his usual favorites. When he walked into the kitchen, he wrinkled his nose like I'd left garbage on the counter. "Again with the chicken, Hannah? Third time this week. Do I have to remind you I like variety? Do better." I bit my lip, counted to 3 in my head, and forced a smile. "I thought you liked that recipe." "I did. Past tense. Now it's boring. Just like the wardrobe you're packing, I bet." He peered at the suitcase on the chair. "You didn't fill it with those small-town rags again, did you? We're staying at a 5-star resort, not visiting your grandma's farm." He pulled out one of my favorite sundresses, a soft yellow one my late grandmother had helped me sew when I was in high school. I reached for it instinctively. "That's special to me, Ryan." "Please don't. Special? It looks cheap." He tossed it onto the bed like it was trash. "We'll buy you something appropriate when we get there. This isn't some budget motel vacation, Hannah. Try to look the part." I turned away, swallowing the sting in my chest. It wasn't new. He'd been erasing pieces of my life like this for years. But that day, it hit me differently. I thought about how he'd laughed at me the night before and wondered why I still cared what he thought of my clothes. Later that evening, as I tidied up the kitchen, his phone buzzed on the counter. Normally, he kept it glued to his hand. I would have ignored it, but the screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize at first, Melissa Gray. And then it clicked. He came back in before I could even process it, scooping up the phone and answering with a smile I hadn't seen in years. Soft, warm, intimate. "Yeah, babe, of course. We'll make it work." "A whole week?" "No problem. She doesn't suspect a thing." He walked into his office, leaving the door cracked just enough for me to hear him laugh. "I can't wait to see you, Melissa." My stomach dropped, but there were no tears, no outburst. Instead, I stood there, frozen, a strange calm settling over me. He'd been cheating. I had suspected it for months, maybe longer, but hearing it, it was different. For a moment, I wondered if I should storm and confront him, demand answers. But instead, I found myself silently folding that yellow sundress back into my suitcase. I wasn't sure why, but I knew I wanted to take it with me. Maybe as a reminder that I still had a piece of myself he hadn't destroyed yet. That night, as he double-checked my suitcase, actually pulling items out and criticizing my choices, something inside me shifted again. I wasn't afraid of him like I used to be. I was tired, and somewhere in that exhaustion was the tiniest flicker of resolve. I didn't know it then, but that flicker would change everything. The Florida Keys shimmered like a painting as we landed. Warm, salty air rushed toward me the moment we stepped out of the car at the resort entrance. Towering palm trees swayed above an infinity pool that seemed to melt into the turquoise ocean beyond. It was paradise, the kind you saw on postcards. Except I didn't feel like I belonged in it. Ryan walked beside me like he owned the place, tossing the valet his keys with a careless flick of his wrist. Hurry with the bags, he said to no one in particular before adjusting his sunglasses and looking at me. Try to keep up, Hannah. We don't want you looking lost. We checked into a suite so luxurious it almost felt unreal. Marble floors, a balcony overlooking the ocean, a whirlpool tub big enough for 4 people. Ryan grinned at his own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. See, this is the life you get because of me. You're welcome. He barely glanced at me before announcing, I've got a business meeting tonight, networking with one of my clients who happens to be here. Order room service or something. Don't wait up. And just like that, he was gone. I stood alone in the silent room, staring at the untouched bed and the suitcase I'd carefully packed. On top of it lay the yellow sundress I had insisted on bringing, no matter what he said. I hesitated only a moment before slipping it on. The fabric, soft and familiar, hugged me like an old friend. For the first time in years, I pulled out my makeup bag, the small one I had hidden from Ryan's constant comments about wasting time on vanity. My hands trembled slightly as I applied foundation, blush, and a sweep of mascara. It felt almost rebellious, like I was doing something forbidden. But when I looked in the mirror, a woman I hadn't seen in a long time looked back. Not the quiet, muted version Ryan preferred, but someone who still had color in her life, someone who still existed. I stepped out of the suite, ignoring the voice in my head warning me about how angry Ryan would be if he found out I'd gone out alone. Tonight, I didn't care. The resort's promenade buzzed with music and laughter. Couples strolled under strings of glowing lights, and the scent of grilled seafood mixed with salt air. I wandered aimlessly, soaking it all in, when a sharp voice cut through the noise. Hey, beautiful, where you heading? A man I didn't know stepped into my path, reeking of alcohol, his smile too wide. I froze for a moment, unsure what to do, but then another voice came, calm, authoritative. Sir, I believe the lady said she's not interested. I turned to see a man in a crisp white shirt and tailored slacks, his dark hair neatly combed back. His presence radiated control, but not the kind Ryan wielded like a weapon. This was different, steadier. The drunk man muttered something under his breath and stumbled away. Are you okay? The stranger asked, his voice warm but firm. Yes, thank you, I said, a little shaken. He smiled. David Ramirez, he introduced himself, extending a hand. I work with the state's Department of Environmental Protection. You'd be surprised how often I have to step in on resort grounds. I shook his hand, feeling oddly safe. I'm Hannah. Well, Hannah, you just saved me from an awkward evening standing by the bar. May I buy you a drink to make up for startling you? I hesitated, glancing toward the ocean, where Ryan was probably laughing over cocktails with Melissa or whoever his client really was. And then, for reasons I couldn't explain, I nodded. Sure, 1 drink. 2 days later, Ryan finally decided to spend time with me, at least on the surface. They're running a private tour through one of the marine sanctuaries, he said, tightening the strap on his expensive watch. Exclusive. Only for VIPs like us. He said us like it was supposed to make me proud, but all I felt was numbness. The sanctuary was breathtaking. Stretches of pristine beach, crystal lagoons, and protected areas where endangered sea turtles nested. The guide, a woman with sun-bronzed skin and a voice full of passion, warned us right away. This is a federal wildlife zone. Do not remove any plants, shells, or animals. Disturbing the ecosystem here is a federal offense. Ryan only half listened, fiddling with his phone and muttering about wasting time on lectures. We followed the trail as the guide pointed out nests carefully marked for protection. Tourists took pictures, whispered in awe, and even the children seemed to instinctively lower their voices in respect for this fragile environment. I breathed in the salty air, letting the peace of the place wash over me. Ryan, however, was restless. At one point, I noticed him step aside, talking in a low voice to a local man who didn't seem to be part of the tour group. Their conversation was hurried, secretive, and when Ryan noticed me looking, he waved me off with a forced smile. "Just asking for directions," he said. I wanted to believe him. I really did. The tour concluded at a scenic overlook where the guide explained how poaching had nearly wiped out entire turtle populations. "We've made progress," she said, "but one hatchling taken from this habitat can mean the loss of an entire line of life. That's why enforcement is strict, no exceptions." On the way back to the dock, security guards were waiting. "Routine bag checks," one of them announced. People sighed but complied, holding open backpacks and purses. When it was Ryan's turn, he huffed dramatically. "Seriously? Do you know who I am? I paid for VIP treatment, not this circus." "Sir, step aside," one guard said firmly. Ryan rolled his eyes and handed over his jacket. My stomach clenched when I saw the guard's expression change as he reached into the inside pocket. He pulled out a small, fabric-wrapped bundle. The guard slowly unwrapped it to reveal a hatchling, a baby sea turtle no bigger than my palm, flailing its tiny flippers in confusion. The air went dead silent. "What the hell is this?" the guard demanded. "That's not mine." Ryan snapped, his face going pale. Someone planted it on me. But I had seen him talking to that stranger. I had seen the way he kept patting his jacket pocket the whole walk back. I knew he was lying. "You are under arrest for attempted trafficking of an endangered species," the guard said, his tone clipped and professional. "This is a felony offense." Another voice came from behind us, when I recognized instantly. "Is there a problem here?" It was David Ramirez. Only now, he wasn't just the kind stranger who bought me a drink. He was in uniform, wearing the badge of his office. And the way the other guards immediately straightened told me just how much authority he had. "Yes, sir," the guard replied. "We have a confirmed trafficking attempt. Evidence in hand." David's eyes shifted from the baby turtle to Ryan, then to me. There was recognition in his gaze, but he kept his tone official. "Take him into custody. We'll process this immediately." Ryan spun toward me, panic etched into his face. "Hannah, tell them it's a mistake. Do something." I stared at him, and for the first time in 6 years I felt nothing but a cold, quiet clarity. Ryan's face twisted in panic as the guards closed in. "Hannah, say something. Tell them it's all a misunderstanding." His voice cracked, desperate, so unlike the man who used to bark orders and laugh in my face. But I didn't move. For 6 years, I had bent under every one of his commands, silenced every objection, and buried every piece of myself to keep the peace. Now I just stood there, watching as he realized no one was coming to save him. Not even me. David Ramirez stepped forward, calm but unyielding. "Mr. Mitchell, attempted trafficking of an endangered species is a federal offense. You'll be taken to the local station for processing. You have the right to remain silent." His voice was professional, steady, but his eyes met mine briefly, as if to say, "You're safe now." Ryan tried again, his voice dropping to a pleading whisper. "Hannah, please. You don't understand what they'll do to me. There's a fine, or worse, public lashes." "I can't, Hannah, I can't handle that. You have to help me." I should have felt something. Anger, satisfaction, pity, but all I felt was a strange emptiness. The woman who used to cry over his every insult wasn't standing there anymore. At the station later, David approached me in a quiet hallway. "Your husband is facing serious charges," he said gently. "But there's something you should know. We've been building a case against a trafficking ring for months. He's connected to people we've been trying to shut down." My chest tightened. "You mean this wasn't the first time?" David nodded. "From what we can tell, he's done this before. We need someone who can help us close this case, someone close enough to know how he works." He paused, studying my expression. "I know you've been through enough already, but if you're willing, your cooperation could make a difference, not just for the investigation, but for you. We can push for a lesser penalty, a fine instead of public punishment and lifetime ban from the sanctuary instead of prison. You'd also have the legal ground to separate from him cleanly. It was a lot to process. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from Ryan and his mess as possible. But another part of me, the part that had been silent for years, spoke up. This is your chance. Not just to leave him, but to take your life back. What would I need to do? I asked quietly. David explained. Testimony, signed statements, a willingness to be part of a public campaign raising awareness about illegal wildlife trade. It's not about humiliating him. It's about protecting something bigger than both of you. I looked down at my hands, the faint scent of salt water still clinging to my skin. 6 years of control, insults, and betrayal, and now I had the power to decide his future. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. I'll do it. I'll cooperate. And I'm filing for divorce. David gave a small nod, not triumphant, but respectful. Good. I'll have someone connect you with an attorney we trust. Hannah, this doesn't have to define you. It can be the beginning of something else. For the first time in years, I believed that. And somewhere deep down, under all the exhaustion and pain, a spark of something warm flickered. Hope. The weeks that followed felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's life. Ryan was charged with illegal trafficking of endangered wildlife. His lawyers fought hard, but the evidence was undeniable. Messages on his phone, bank transfers linked to known poachers, and my sworn statement confirming what I'd overheard before our trip. The deal David had arranged went through. Instead of facing a public punishment that would have been broadcast on every news outlet, Ryan paid a massive fine, was banned for life from the Florida Keys, and left with a criminal record that would shadow him forever. When the gavel came down in that courtroom, I didn't cheer, I didn't cry. I just breathed a slow, steady breath that felt like the first real one in years. The same week, I filed for divorce. Ryan tried every tactic, begging, threatening, even sending me long messages about how I'd ruined his life. But for once, none of it had power over me. I had David's legal team behind me, and for the first time, I had something I hadn't even realized I'd lost, my own voice. I moved into a small apartment in Tampa, nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in 6 years, I decorated without asking permission. I bought a secondhand makeup chair and pulled out my old brushes from storage. They were a little worn, but when I held them, it felt like holding a piece of myself I thought was gone forever. I enrolled in evening classes to update my skills. Some nights, I came home exhausted, my hands stained with eyeshadow and foundation. But I smiled as I fell asleep because it was my choice to be tired. I even started a small social media page, posting before and after transformations. Within months, I had my first private clients. It wasn't just about makeup anymore, it was about connection. Women who came to me weren't just looking for a new look, they wanted to feel seen. And I understood that because I had spent years feeling invisible. One day, I got a call from David. We're launching a public campaign on wildlife conservation. Your story, it could help people understand why illegal trafficking is so damaging. Would you consider speaking at the opening? I hesitated, nervous about being in front of cameras. But then I thought about all the times Ryan had silenced me. Not anymore. I'll do it, I said. The event was surreal. Standing on that stage, telling my story, not as a victim, but as a woman who had finally taken her life back, was more healing than I expected. When I stepped down, the applause felt like closure, like the final lock clicking open on the cage I had lived in for too long. That night, I sat in my little apartment, the scent of setting powder and sea breeze still lingering on my clothes, and I smiled. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I was free, and that freedom was worth more than anything Ryan had ever dangled in front of me. For the first time in years, I looked at my reflection and didn't see someone broken. I saw someone rebuilding, stronger than before, someone who was finally enough for herself. Months passed, and life began to feel steady again. Not exciting or dramatic, just steady. I worked in a small spa during the day and took freelance clients in the evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but every appointment, every satisfied smile from a client reminded me why I loved makeup in the first place. That's how I met Ethan Cole. He was a freelance photographer new to Tampa and came into the spa one afternoon asking if anyone could do makeup for a portfolio shoot he was putting together. "I'm trying to build a client base here," he explained, holding his camera like it was a part of him. "Weddings, graduations, that kind of thing. Do you take on freelance projects?" I almost said no out of habit. For years, I had trained myself to avoid opportunities, afraid of how Ryan would react. But Ryan was gone, and I wasn't living in his shadow anymore. So I said yes. We met the following weekend for the shoot. It was just him, me, and a college student model who needed headshots. The work felt natural. Foundation, contour, subtle highlights to catch the light just right. Ethan barely gave direction. He trusted me to do my job, and when the model looked in the mirror, she whispered, "Wow, is that me?" Ethan grinned. "You're talented, Hannah. Like, really talented." His tone was sincere, not patronizing or controlling. It startled me how refreshing that felt. One shoot turned into several. He hired me for engagement photos, then a small wedding, then referred me to one of his friends who ran a boutique clothing line. We started grabbing coffee after shoots, sometimes lunch, always talking about work at first, until one day it wasn't about work at all. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about losing his mom young, about how photography had saved him from feeling lost. I told him about Ryan, carefully at first, just fragments, but he never pushed, never judged. He simply listened. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back appointments, I came home to find a small bouquet of sunflowers sitting by my apartment door with a note. "For the days you forget how bright you are. E." I cried, but it wasn't the sad, frustrated tears I'd grown used to. These were soft tears, the kind that come when something good feels almost unreal. We didn't rush things. After years of living under control, I wasn't ready for anything fast, and Ethan seemed to understand that intuitively. He never tried to define what we were too soon, never made me feel like I had to earn his kindness. We simply enjoyed each other's company. One evening, sitting on the hood of his car watching the sun sink into the Gulf, he said, "You know, you're different when you smile like that. It's like you finally believe you deserve to." I turned to him, startled. "I'm still working on that," I admitted. He smiled softly. "Then let me remind you until you don't have to work on it anymore." That was the moment I realized healing wasn't just about leaving the bad behind. It was about letting good things in. And Ethan was good, steady, and patient enough to let me heal at my own pace. For the first time in years, love didn't feel like a cage. It felt like freedom. A year later, I stood in front of my own storefront, hands trembling not from fear, but from pride. Freedom Beauty, that was the name painted across the glass door in soft gold letters. My salon, my dream, finally breathing on its own. Inside, sunlight spilled across polished counters and rows of products I had handpicked myself. A shelf by the entrance held framed photos from my clients. Women smiling at weddings, proms, and job interviews, moments they wanted to remember because of how confident they had felt. There was one picture I always stopped at, a candid of me laughing with a teenage girl after teaching her how to do her own makeup for the first time. Her eyes were red from crying when she came in, but she left smiling. That photo reminded me why I started all of this. Ryan's shadow no longer haunted me. The divorce had finalized quietly after his court settlement, and we hadn't spoken since. I heard he'd left Florida, embarrassed and trying to rebuild his image somewhere else. Maybe he would succeed, maybe not. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My life now had new faces, new voices. Ethan was part of it, showing up after shoots with takeout when I stayed late working, always insisting on fixing that stubborn light fixture I kept ignoring. David sometimes stopped by too, mostly as a friend, to update me on the conservation campaign my testimony had supported. The illegal trafficking ring was dismantled, and because of my small role, dozens of endangered animals were safe. One evening, as I closed the shop, I caught my reflection in the glass door. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her shoulders were relaxed, her eyes bright, a soft smile curving her lips. Not because someone told her to smile, but because she genuinely wanted to. I thought about everything it took to get here. The humiliation, the betrayal, the terrifying step of saying no more. And for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt gratitude, not for Ryan, not for what he did, but for what I learned through surviving it. The truth is, sometimes life falls apart so completely that you can't put it back the way it was. But maybe that's the point. I wasn't meant to go back to who I was before Ryan. I was meant to grow into someone stronger, someone who refused to settle for being small and silent. As I locked up, Ethan appeared with his easy grin and a bag of dinner in hand. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, kissing my cheek. I smiled, leaning against the door. "You always seem to know." "Just paying attention," he said softly. That night, sitting at the kitchen table of our small shared home, I realized something. Healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, hard, and often lonely. But it's worth every step because one day you wake up and realize you aren't surviving anymore. You're living. So if you're listening to this and you feel stuck, unheard, or like you don't matter, please believe me when I say this. You do matter. You have the right to walk away from what breaks you and walk toward what makes you whole. I did, and it was the best decision I ever made.